Peace, everybody. Welcome to the Vital Hoops Podcast. Happy New Year. This one is the first of 2023. My name is Fernando Cardenas, aka International XB, and I'm your host. Extremely happy to be here. We got a lot coming this year. Our website is gonna soon drop, so stay tuned for that in order to start the year off strong. Now, you know Vital Hoops is for the culture. So when we talk about the culture, in my opinion, we must always have a focus on anti-colonialism and anti-oppression. Today, we have a special guest. Today's guest is a historian. He is a consultant. He is the president of the Pan-African League, Umoja, and he is a writer. He has written a couple of very interesting books, including Africa Unite, which I am reading right now. It is a history of Pan-Africanism. Let's welcome to the show, Amzat Boukari Yabara. Amzat, Jumbo, and welcome to the Vital Hoops Podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, Jumbo, Fernando. Thank you very much. I'm good. I'm really good.
Yes.
I think I spent a good 2022 year, and I
Okay.
think that the new year is gonna be great.
That's great, man. It's great to have you. Listen, I know you have a lot going on, but I appreciate you taking the time, to come to the Vital Hoops podcast and share with us, get into this Pan-Africanist perspective, which is so important, you know. So listen, let's get into it. I would love for you to, you're a historian, you're an organizer, you're a writer, but I would love for you to tell the listeners how you personally began. How did you get into Pan-Africanism? How did you become a Pan-Africanist? Did you grow up in a Pan-Africanist household, or was it more of self-education? And how did you get to that point?
Yeah, indeed, my father is from Benin, West Africa. That is a very strong country in the colonial history because we had a strong resistance to French colonialism. And we have a nationalist feeling in our country in Benin, Dahomey. And my mother is from Martinique. And as you know, Martinique is a country of Frantz Fanon, is a country of Aimé Césaire, and is a country of African diaspora resistance. And so from the beginning, with my father and my mother, I am part of the Pan-African history. That is a connection between the continent and the diaspora. My father and my mother were not specially activists, but they were quite conscious about their history, and they knew that it was important to give to their children a sense of pride, a sense of belonging to Mother Africa. So I was born in Benin. This is really important in my life. To be born in Africa is something quite good. I was raised and I grew in Benin, in Cotonou. And then I moved to France later. And then in France, I started to listen to hip hop music. So part of my conscientization is through hip hop music, Public Enemy, KRS-One, and other MCs who used to include African and Black history in their lyrics.
Yes.
So Tupac Shakur and so on, all those people, they were part of my training. And when I was a teenager, I used to read Malcolm X and other political activists from the Black diaspora. And also I learned from Kwame Nkrumah, visiting Ghana when I was 16 years old. And all this youth was part of what I decided to do later, that is to say, to become a historian, to trace the starting of our struggles and to understand why we are in such a mess today. What is the explanation of our situation as an African continent, as a Black community, and as a global South people? And this is how I decide to connect later my education as a historian, as an intellectual, with a political organization, the Pan-African League Umoja, realizing that you cannot be an intellectual without contributing to the transformation of the society, without giving your part to the awakening of our community. And this is how I developed since 15, 20 years, Pan-African vision, Pan-African analysis of my own life, of my contribution to the historical domain, and also to the transformation of the world today through Pan-Africanism.
Yeah, no doubt, man, no doubt. That's really interesting. It's a very interesting story. And I realized that, yesterday as I was doing my research a little bit, I realized that we're close, we're real close actually in age. I was born in 85. And so I did have many influences just like you. Vital Hoops is a hip hop podcast as well, and my influences were also, KRS-One and, Public Enemy and, even X-Clan before that. And then, coming into Dead Prez, a lot of, pro-Black, pro-African liberation, conscious hip hop, which is what, what the culture is about at its core. But it definitely shaped me as well. And that is what got me. And I then, got to learning about Pan-Africanism really and became one myself. But listen, go ahead.
What you need to know is that you cannot learn Pan-Africanism at school. It is not taught at school or in any university. So it's always self-educating. It's always by yourself that you get this consciousness. And this is something really important because we are on the margins of the intellectual world, but we are also our own grassroots intellectuals. So the notion of being part of grassroots community, grassroots organizing, is really important when we speak of our training as political activists, as an intellectual, especially in the case of Pan-Africanism.
Absolutely, I understand that, and I agree with this. I know many organizers, they stress that you cannot call yourself a Pan-Africanist unless you are part of a grassroots organization and, being really dealing with the struggle from a hands-on perspective. But so I wanted to ask you this, just for the listeners, for those who may not know, can you please just define Pan-Africanism as a whole? What is Pan-Africanism?
Yeah, Pan-Africanism is a global movement of liberation, of resistance, and of unification of African people abroad and in the continent. It is starting with the transatlantic slave trade, with the birth of an African diaspora in the Americas that fought for their freedom and understand that their freedom could not be true until the African continent would be free again. So the connection between African diaspora and African continent is really central. And it is also part of the revalorization of our humanities, of our identities, and also the notion of the unity through the diversities of African identities. So Pan-Africanism is this global movement of liberation. And then in the 20th century, it became a tool for the anti-colonial movement. That is to say that you cannot be free unless you are united. You need to build unity to get freedom. And this is really important because Pan-Africanism is fighting against colonialism and neo-colonialism that is based on the idea that you must divide to rule over African people. You must divide them. So absolutely. The issue of division, the issue of balkanization of African continent, the issue of putting black against black is really central in how we had to define Pan-Africanism as a self-liberation movement and also as a global and geopolitical doctrine that put Africa at the center of our own destiny. So the idea of Pan-Africanism is also African solution to African problems? How do we get with our own issues without being the puppets of the Western or the Chinese or the Russian and so on? So this is all about this global liberation of Africa and Black people out of Africa.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And you know, it's funny you talk about, you know, the division of African people, of Black people, you know, and I don't know if you know, but I see a lot of new movements coming now out of the United States, for example, where they're calling themselves, you know, foundational Blacks. I don't know if you heard about these things like FBA and these kind of little movements where they want to divide themselves from other African people and say, you know, just we Black Americans and all these things, you know, these divisive movements, which are, you know, which are the focus. This is what the enemy wants, really. This is what it's about, you know, against Pan-Africanism and dividing African people.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. But it is about how we were indoctrinated inside the imperialist system. Because there are many Black people in the Americas that are part of the world imperialist US system.
absolutely.
They are contributing to war on Africa. They have no empathy with African people, and they are absolutely American from the toe to the head. So this is really important that we understand that it is not only being Black, it is about Black consciousness.
Yes.
And this is why the issue of the South African struggle against apartheid is really important when we speak of Steve Biko, for example. How do we build a Black consciousness, regardless you're Black, white, or light skin, and so on? It is really important because you have many people who are Black, but who are not engaged in Pan-Africanism or in the African liberation movement. They are part of the neo-colonial movement. So it is really important in the case of the US to understand that it is not because you're Black that you're part of the movement. You have to be engaged. And we have a story of Black traitors, a long story of Black traitors that we need also to engage with.
Of course, a lot of times they use our own people in order to assassinate us. There's always been Black traitors, you know, ever since slavery to, you know, to come into our movements and just destroy them. That's obvious. It's like everywhere, but definitely I see where you're coming from. And I wanted to ask you because I hear that, you know, a lot of people talk about within Pan-Africanism, there are kind of like two schools, right? Two different paths. Well, you know, there are a few, but you know, a cultural Afrocentric Pan-Africanist versus the more revolutionary socialist Pan-Africanist. I usually say that, you know, really there isn't one without the other, but you know, what do you think about that, and how do you think, where do they join, and how can we work through that together and in order to build?
Yeah, I think the cultural Pan-Africanism is about the self-identity, the need to get a self-consciousness of who we are and what we can achieve in this world. I think that this kind of nationalism could be reactionary because it is only based on the appearance. It is not based on the transformation of the economic system. It is also about the issue between race and class. Do you consider that race comes before class or the other one? And the Marxists also try to hijack Pan-Africanism because they understood that Black people, wherever they are at the lower side of the society. And they should be engaged in leftist movement, in communism, and so on. But communism and Pan-Africanism are not the same thing, because we know that it is not because we are part of the lower classes of the society that we need to put class before race, because we know that our social position is also the result of racism.
Absolutely.
And the issue of racism is at the basis of the white supremacy. So we need to connect race and class to struggle against domination. And I think that the division between the nationalist cultural Pan-Africanism and the Marxist revolutionary Pan-Africanism need to be overcome to get a true Pan-African liberation movement that is based on the cultural liberation, but not in a capitalist way, because some part of the Afrocentricity way is also part of the neoliberal conception of Black identity.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side, the issue of revolutionary Pan-Africanism is about destroying the capitalist state and understand that we need to move back to another vision of society, another vision of relation between men and women, between a generation, between men and nature, and so on. So this issue was really hard in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
It led to many, many internal fightings. And today we have another situation because the issue of Marxism has lost for many people. And the issue of Afrocentricity, the issue of cultural nationalism developed in what we call today Kemetism. That is to say, we need to go back to the traditional roots and be very traditionalist.
Mm-hmm.
But this traditionalism is not always adapted to the political struggles that we need to engage with. So we need to find a synthesis between all those positions, and in the same time, the fruitful of Pan-Africanism is the combination of all those positions. Some of them are quite radical, other are more consensual, but we need to find the good recipe, the good ingredients to address all the different issues. Because one difficulty is that the global African family is living different conditions wherever they are, or whatever their situation is. It is not the same if you're living in the US as a Black people as when you're living in Cuba or in Venezuela or in South Africa or in Mali or in Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
So all those situations are different. So everyone has a different point of view of the situation. And this is why we need to reorganize our movement through organizations, political organization, but also Pan-African Congress, where we can sit and see what is the situation of Black people in Brazil, in Cuba, in the US, in Canada, and so on, and what is the most little tool that we can use for everybody to get a new starting today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's finding the right balance and bringing everything together. It's a holistic approach. That's what it is really. It's a holistic approach where we bring every different aspect and come together. One more thing that I hear now also is I hear a certain group of the African or Black conscious community calling themselves not Pan-Africanists, but African internationalists. Have you heard about this? They're calling themselves African internationalists, and they're even referring to Pan-Africanism as petty bourgeoisie and as a movement that's coming from the top down instead of a grassroots. And
yes, this is a very challenging issue because Pan-Africanism has a quite negative vision for many people. They saw it as a reactionary movement, as a petit bourgeois movement, as a dreamy or utopian movement, and so on. And we need to do also with lots of people that use the word Pan-African for anything. Today we have dictators in Africa that are using the term of Pan-African in their own speech. And we have the necessity to clarify the concept and to clarify what is Pan-Africanism today. And this is because we do not this clarification that other people decide to take other terms like African internationalist. And the issue of African internationalism is something quite interesting because in the interwar period, we were talking about Black internationalism. And Black internationalism is the same as Pan-Africanism because Pan-Africanism is also internationalism.
Absolutely.
But the difficulty is that in the 60s, with African independence, Pan-Africanism was taken back to the African continent and it became a kind of continentalism. And the African diaspora was excluded from the Pan-African movement due to the policy of the new African states that understood that Pan-Africanism was only for the continent. But Pan-Africanism was born in the African diaspora. So it is absolutely internationalist. It cannot be continentalist, it is internationalist. So we have to address all this vocabulary today, like those who call themselves African descendant of slavery, ADOS, say that they are not part of people coming from Africa. They say that people coming from Africa are taking advantage over Black people in the US, so they have to fight those people, etc., etc. So all this terminology is really sensitive, and we need to analyze it very carefully because it's something really really touchy.
Absolutely. There's one more thing, that people a lot of times ask me when I speak about Pan-Africanism, which is I believe Pan-Africanism is really our only road to liberation. I believe that that's the only road to liberation. But a lot of people ask me, it sounds good in theory, but it's impossible because we're not organized enough, we're not unified, we'll never understand each other enough to get to the United States of Africa. And it's just kind of a dream. I know that's something that's it's a word that's been going on for many years. A lot of people think that way, But what would you say to that when they tell me that?
I think we have to tell them that we are on the road of unification. We are on the road to unite. It is not a story of overnight. It's not today that we are going to get united all over in Africa. And it is not the goal. The goal is not to unite all African people. It is not a totalitarian vision. But it is the idea that we need to gain a certain amount of unity so that we can better defend our interests as African people in Africa and out of Africa. So we need to tell them that we are on the road of this unification. And this is something that we are building every day. It is not something that has been done in the past. And so it is a very exciting challenge. And this is why some of our best ancestors gave their life for. So it is our duty to engage in Pan-Africanism, to engage in African unity, because we are ourselves the result of this African unity. If we are here today, it is because our ancestors struggled, because we could have been how can I say, genocided.
Yeah, we could have been exterminated, absolutely.
We survived. Exactly. We survived to slavery, we survived to colonialism, and we are already surviving to new colonialism. But we cannot give to our children only a future of survival. We need to give to our children, to the next generation, a future of hope, a future of success, of victories. And this is why we are fighting today. I think it's what we can tell to those people who say that, oh, it's a dream, you can never achieve it, etc. We have to make our contribution,
absolutely,
like those before and the ones after who would make it, and that's all. Yeah,
definitely. And it's an active movement, like you said, and it's always been going on ever since the first colonizers came to to the motherland and they started snatching our ancestors, the resistance always been there. So, that's what it is. If you could give our listeners, I know there's many, but if you could give our listeners three Pan-Africanist figures to study in order to really comprehend, grasp the concept, and become a Pan-Africanist, who would you choose?
Yeah, I think the champion of Pan-Africanism is Kwame Nkrumah. He was the first leader of Ghana. He led Ghana to independence in 1957. He wrote Africa Must Unite, and he explains that Pan-Africanism is about the unity of African states regarding defense, foreign affairs, and also monetary zone. And Kwame Nkrumah understood that a single country, a single African country, could not resist to the multinational, could not resist to the imperialist powers, and that we need to put our strength together to defend our continent, to defend our resources, our natural resources. And he understood also the centrality of Congo in the imperialist war in Africa. And this is why he gave support to Patrice Lumumba. Unfortunately, it did not work. He also gave support to Sekou Touré from Guinea when Guinea decided to break with France. And Kwame Nkrumah was also engaged with the Afro-American community
Yes.
because he spent time in the US. And he also gets the visits from Martin Luther King at the Ghana independence in 1957, and above all, from Malcolm X in 1964. And many Afro-Americans were based in Ghana. And I think his policy regarding Pan-Africanism was really interesting. Unfortunately, he was overthrown in 1966 by a military coup. And I think he's the most interesting figure of Pan-Africanism because he made a synthesis between the two giants of Pan-Africanism, W.E.B. Du Bois from the US, intellectual,
Yeah.
Pan-African, and Marcus Garvey from Jamaica, who led the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And Nkrumah was at the junction of those two giants, and he was also a political leader. So I think he's really the champion of Pan-Africanism. The second would be Amilcar Cabral from Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, because he was a poet. He was also a military leader. He led the armed liberation movement in Guinea-Bissau, and he understood that culture was central in the African liberation. The liberation of African people is a cultural act, he would say. And he also understood that we need to build unity through the struggle. It is a struggle of the people that unites the people. It is through struggling that you unite with your brothers and your sisters. When you're not struggling, you're selfish. You're thinking to your own interests. But when you had to struggle, you know that you cannot struggle alone. So you build unity. And this is his vision, saying that in every African country, each one must, like Fanon would say, identify your struggle and devoted yourself to struggle for the freedom of your country. And this is the connection of all the internal struggle in each African country that would build African unity. So it was really practical. It was really concrete. And he used to say that people are not fighting for words like liberty, democracy, and so on. They are fighting for material improvement. Okay. They are fighting for concrete things. And we need to explain to them that beyond the words like democracy, freedom, and so on, you have material issue, concrete things, so that people can give their life to the struggle. And Amilcar Cabral was also assassinated in 1973 by a Portuguese agent. And I think he's probably one of the most interesting leaders because he was also an internationalist. He was a star at the 1966 Havana Conference, the Tricontinental, invited by Fidel Castro, and everyone was looking at Amilcar Cabral. Even Che Guevara was under Amilcar Cabral because Amilcar Cabral had the science of fighting, had the science of the armed liberation movement, and he would say that when you're fighting with the people, you need to organize your movement on the same line as the social organization of the people. And it is also part of this grassroots Pan-Africanism. The last one would be Walter Rodney. Walter Rodney from Guyana.
Guyana.
British Guyana is the one I did my PhD on. And he wrote a seminal book.
You wrote a book on him too, right? You wrote a book on Walter Rodney.
Yeah, I wrote a book at Presence African Edition. And Walter Rodney in 1972, he wrote How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.
Wow, that's a great book.
That is probably the most important book written in the 25th century by a Black historian. And in this book, he explained how Africa lost its sovereignty and what is the situation regarding neocolonialism. And his study is in the line of the books of Cyril James, Black Jacobins, of Capitalism and Slavery's Eric Williams, because he dealt with the issue of reparation for slavery and colonialism. He explained the consequences, the causes and consequences of capitalism in Africa. And he also wrote a book about the Rastafarian movement, groundings with my brothers, because he was committed to the African liberation with the Black Power and Rastafarian movement in Jamaica and in the US in the 60s, in the late 60s. And when he was killed in 1980, he was writing a book about the Guyanese working class people, because alongside his intellectual work that led him to live in Tanzania, he was also politically engaged in a multiracial and Marxist movement, the Working People Alliance in Guyana. And I think that Walter Rodney with Amilcar Cabral and Kwame Nkrumah are the three most important theoreticians and activists of Pan-Africanism in this 20th century that everyone must learn of right now to engage in the new battle of the 21st century.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you about this because, obviously there has been a lot of work done, to divide us, as African people. There's been a lot of work done in order to depoliticize, our people. And I think that's one of our main problems is that, our people in general are lacking political education. And I think this is why a lot of time we're reactionary. Like you said, we're reactionary because sometimes we don't have the basis. We don't truly know our history. It happens a lot with athletes. The youth looks up to athletes, unfortunately, a little too much, but the youth look up to athletes, the people look up to the athletes. How powerful would it be if, for example, NBA superstars would become Pan-Africanists, let's say, or how could that work, and how powerful do you think that would be for our people?
I think we have lots of sportsmen, sportswomen who had a political engagement. Most famous was Muhammad Ali, case of Black struggle. But you have many other ones. Black athletes had a strong visibility. When we speak of LeBron James and other people like that, Serena, Venus Williams, they had a strong visibility. And in the meantime, they are part of the white control economic and media system. So when they're speaking about political issues, they are on the target of the imperialist system, and they need to protect their career. So it is not easy for them to take a position, but they can support, they can give money, they can raise funds, they can give a visibility to the struggle of the Black community, of the Black organization. But it is not really the case. Most of them are part of controlled media and economic system.
Yeah.
And it is a change because in the 60s, 70s, 80s, we had a commitment of sports regarding political issues, especially Black struggle. It is not the case today because our artists, our athletes have been depoliticized. And sometimes when they think that they are apolitical, they are also used by the system to be part of our control, our inferiorization. I think we really need to get some Black athletes politically engaged, politically committed, because their speech is also really important for the youth. They need to contribute to Black economy, to buy Black, because most of them, they have lots of money. So it's really important for them to buy Black when they can, because they can buy Black.
Yeah.
They also can organize some business. They can hire in the community. I think they cannot give advices to Black voters. They are not really at this level.
Yeah.
But their position is really important. When, in the case of the US, when they are supporting the Democrats, the Republicans, etc., it means a lot.
Yeah.
It means a lot. And I think that sometimes it is better that they do not support either, and they say they are apolitical instead of supporting Democrat or Republican, in the case of the US. In the case of Africa, it is a little bit different because in Africa, the sport that is king is football, it's not basketball. And we have players like Samuel Eto'o, George Weah, who won the first, who is the only African that wins the Golden Ball. Is now president of Liberia. But we saw at the last World Cup that he traveled to Qatar because his son was playing for the United States. So many people said, oh, he's the president of Liberia, but his own son is playing for the United States. So you have the issue of nationality, and nationality is also, sports nationality is also political engagement. We have some African basketball players that are now playing in the NBAs or part of the US national team and so on, but they are coming from Africa. So this is really important that we look at athletes like models when they can be some example for the youth. But in the meantime, we know that their political scope is quite limited in this world.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, when you speak about, playing for national teams also, that's a very interesting thing, because that is something that is complicated for certain athletes. Certain athletes have the choice, for example, of playing for a European team, like we see it with Mbappe, for example, playing for France and not playing for Cameroon, or we see that a lot. But there are many factors that come into that. I was speaking to my sister that I had on the show, Tuti Gandega, from the Malian national team for basketball, and she explained to me that she would play for the French team if she could have had the opportunity. She plays for Mali, but she was like, it would be an easy decision for me because I grew up in France and I played in the French team when I was in youth, and then growing up, that would be the next step. It's an easy decision for me. All these things, because there are many factors that come in also, because also the athletics associations in Africa, many times they're controlled by the politicians, and sometimes these politicians are puppets. They're not Pan-Africanists, so it's complicated.
Yeah, and in the meantime, you have to know, and I think you know, that basketball, NBA, it is a show time. And,
of course, it's a business.
And politics is almost the same. When you have some political meeting, it's like an NBA game, or you have some NBA basketball demonstration inside political meetings. So,
of course,
the symbol of the national anthem, All those things are very sensitive, and the case of Kaepernick, for example,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not easy, but we need to get a new activism in the black sports today. I think it's really important.
Without a doubt, without a doubt, I agree. Um, we're gonna close out soon. Just want to thank you again for your time, man. Um, talk to me a little bit about the Pan African League Umoja, which I'm a proud member of, and you becoming the president. Please talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the league is a global international organization. It was created in 2012, almost 10 years ago, in France at the beginning, and it started to spread in several African countries, like Senegal, like Togo, Congo, and also in diaspora like Canada, Belgium. And it is a socio-political movement that try to implement Pan-Africanism, a new vision of Pan-Africanism that is based on the idea that we need to train, politically speaking, our youth so that they can engage on the political level for the victory of Pan-Africanism at the political level, at the head of the states, at the control of communities, and so on. So we are a kind of working in progress organization. We are an anti-imperialist movement. That is to say that we are not funded by Western donators. We are trying to get our autonomy at every level of our organization. We have a newspaper, Pan-African Magazine, that is published every 3 months. We also have a publishing house in Congo. And the goal of our organization is to build African and Pan-African consciousness in the diaspora and to build some political organization in Africa. That is to say that we need to work on a generation for 5-10 years, and this generation later would get enough knowledge of Pan-Africanism so that when it gets in political position, they could implement our vision.
Absolutely.
So we also are trying to develop diplomatic network with countries in South America or the countries in Africa, because we think that the internationalist side is really important for Pan-Africanism today. So this is a global international organization. I'm the president of the global organization, but in each section, you have an office, and in each section, the organization, the activities are self-controlled by the people. So we are, how can I say, a grassroots organizing movement in the section, but at the global level, we are quite a top-down organization. So we are trying to build a synthesis of all the Pan-African experiences to find the good one that we could later implement at the level of the African states. That is to say that in the Pan-African League Umoja, Umoja is a word that means that means unity in Swahili. You can find some people, for example, from Rwanda and Congo inside the organization. And it is really important because Rwanda organization and Congo organization are at war one against another. But when you have people from the two countries inside the same organization, you can find a better solution instead of fighting each other at the sea of the imperialist powers that are working on dividing African people. So the notion of unity is really important for us. And this is what I'm trying to expand since I'm the president of this organization.
Definitely, definitely. We're gonna have, and I spoke on this on my last, on my previous podcast, about, the magazine, the Pan African, that people can, support and check it out. But I'm gonna have all the information down in the description for people to click the link and go check it out and check out the website as well and see a little bit of what we're working on, definitely. But to get back to what you were saying, you know, and you spoke about this earlier, you know, the different struggles that our brothers and sisters are living, you know, in different countries. You know, I think, you know, I love this. I don't know if you remember this, Malcolm X, when he was speaking about how there needs to be grassroots organization in every countries. And so the Afro-Cubans have to organize between themselves, and the Afro-Brazilians and the African Americans and the brothers in Senegal. And then we need to link these organizations together. We need to connect, you know, have the Afro-Cubans speaking to the Afro-Venezuelans, to the Haitians, to everybody, you know, and that's really what it's about, you know. So I appreciate the work, man. And and I thank you, man. You know, I just wanna before we go, there are two things that we like to do here on the Vital Hoops podcast. You know, the first one is, I think, unfortunately, in our society today, a lot of people get their information from, you know, quick little things. Like they go on Instagram and they see a 2-minute clip. Now they think they know something. They got the information, or they'll read a tweet or something like that. And we're not necessarily getting into, you know, books, which is, I think, is something very important that we need to get back into, is books, you know. So we like to do this recommendation thing. So if you could recommend to the listeners one book or a couple books that you think are important.
Yeah, one book is Carter Godwin Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro. It was written several decades ago, but it is still relevant because it explains how the indoctrination is done, how the propaganda is built over our vision of the world as Black people, and how the mental control is ruling over our daily life as Black people in the Western world. So the miseducation of the Negro is really relevant to understand how we are at the center of psychological warfare. I think that the speeches of Thomas Sankara are really important. I did not mention it when you asked me three figures, but I think that Sankara is really important because he had a lots of punchlines, like we would say today, and his speeches are really inspiring. And I think it's a good reading for many people desperate about the situation. And third one is not especially a book, but I think that the songs of Miriam Makeba are really important for everyone who wants to feel Pan-Africanism, to hear Pan-Africanism, and to dance on Pan-African music. So the songs of Miriam Makeba are really important. She was Mother Africa. She was engaged for the liberation of the African continent. And I think that we had to recognize that she led a very, very inspiring life. And yeah, I think that's the three recommendation I will do to our listeners.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for that. And I'm gonna, you know, on my previous podcast, I also just recommended Neocolonialism from Kwame Nkrumah, which is important because you spoke about, you know, Kwame Nkrumah being probably the most important figure in Pan-Africanism. So to the listeners, make sure you check that out as well. But what I want to recommend today is this right here, you know. For those of you listening, I'm just showing the Africa Unite. It's a book by my brother over here, Amzat Boukari Yabara. And, you know, it's a history of Pan-Africanism. Great book. You know, it gets into some detail about, you know, a perspective of, you know, Pan-Africanism history, because there are many histories of Pan-Africanism, but this one is a great one. So definitely please check it out. Make sure you buy your books if you can from local Black-owned stores. You know, it's important. You know, try to stay away from Amazon and all these things. And yeah, support, man. Get yourself a library. Start building a library. It's important in your home. We all should have our own little libraries. So yeah, so that's that, man. Thank you, Amzat. Listen, before you go, you can please tell the listeners where they can find you. You know, your website, your information, so they can follow you, follow your work, and I'll have all the information down in the description. But if you want to have the last words, you know, anything you want to tell the listeners.
Yeah, you can follow my agenda on my website. It's only my name, amzatboukariyabara.com. You also have the website of lpumoja.com. And we are also on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. And yeah, and I think that it's really important that we had this discussion because my book is in French. And one great issue is how do we connect over the language barriers. It is really important that we do not stay in our own linguistic zone, colonial
Yeah.
linguistic zone, and that we
Yeah.
build connections with the so-called English speaking and also the Spanish ones. That is really important in our struggle today.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your invitation, and I thank you very much. And umoja to your listeners.
Thank you, my brother, comrade. Thank you. And yeah, peace.
Thank you.
All right, that was episode number 22 of the Vital Hoops podcast. We thank our guest, Amzat. Please, everybody, check out the websites down in the description. Go check out the Pan-African League Umoja's website. Purchase an online magazine. Support the movement. No matter where you at in the world, you can always try to link up with a Pan-Africanist organization and do good for yourself, your family, your community, and your people. You know what I mean? So please make sure you like, share, subscribe, and spread the word. Vital Hoops is for the culture. We out. Peace.